Hello, everyone, and welcome to WooStream. We are having our first Willamette in Dialogue webinar, The Ethics of AI, Transformative Technologies, where we're bringing Willamette to you specifically through a Woo lens. My name is Tiffany Newton, and I'm the Director of Alumni and Community Engagement here at the university. This evening's session will focus on the developments of artificial intelligence and the ethical questions surrounding its implementation in technology and other aspects of society. I'm excited to introduce you to our panelists, Jameson Watts, Dean of the School of Computing and Information Sciences, and Kristen Gore, Assistant Professor of Data Science. I'm going to read quick bios. Jameson Watts serves as the inaugural Dean of Willamette School of Computing and Informational Sciences. Prior to Willamette, his career was spent working as a software developer and consultant for technology startups in Boulder, Colorado, several of which had successful exits and acquisitions by Goldman Sachs, Jive Software, and Shutterfly. He eventually sold his consulting business and left Colorado for the University of Arizona to pursue his PhD and passion for research. As a doctoral student, Jameson studied marketing, economic sociology, and computational linguistics, and has published in top-tier journals like Network Science, the Journal of Interactive Marketing, and the Journal of Advertising. He also spent several summers conducting research at the Santa Fe Institute, working on social network theory and natural language processing. Jameson is also an alum, having earned his MBA from Willamette. And now, last but not least, Dr. Kristen Gore was born and raised in Aiken, South Carolina. She attended North Carolina State University on an Air Force ROTC scholarship and graduated in 2009 with dual degrees in meteorology and statistics. In 2014, Dr. Gore received her PhD in statistics from Columbia University in New York and moved to Corvallis, Oregon to join HP as a statistician. In her most recent role as the statistical data strategy lead for the Microfluidics Technology and Operations Organization, she created a comprehensive manufacturing sampling strategy that optimized cost and quality for new technology platforms. Gore served as a primary content developer and statistics instructor for the broader company, regularly teaching a variety of courses to interdisciplinary audiences around the world. Jameson, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're excited to hear from you both on AI and your insights into how this area is developing with a multitude of ethical discussions going on currently. So I will hand it over.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's the next step?
Just if you want to start going in, so let's start with what is artificial intelligence and what does that mean? So let's start with the basics and then we'll go into the really confounding ethical issues that I'm sure you're confronting in the classroom and the real world.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. So you would think that everyone knows what AI is, given how much it's been in the headlines. But the truth is that when most people say AI these days, what they're really talking about is generative AI and typically large language models. For those of us who have been in the field or adjacent to the field for a long time, this thing that we now call artificial intelligence, has kind of had many other names. So, predictive analytics, machine learning, a variety of other things of that sort. I can remember writing my very first classification model back in 1998. And so in a lot of ways, the technology itself hasn't evolved all that dramatically. Many of the models are the same. Many of the techniques are the same. What's changed and what has really caused kind of this inflection point in the popular imagination is the availability of two things, data and computing power. And so we have a huge amount of data now to train our models on, and we have the computing resources to actually do so in a relatively efficient manner. And so when we think about AI today, a lot of times we're just thinking, okay, chatbots, right? So these are things where I type in a question and then something that is, kind of eerily human-like is responding on the other end. But behind the scenes, what's really happening is that we've got a fairly standard model, and it's using a ton of data to simply predict the next word in a sequence of words. And the really eerie, crazy thing about this is that it works so well, right? That a model that is just taking a look at a whole bunch of words and saying, what should the next word be, right, is human-like, right? It's crazy, right? And I remember when we moved from Chat GPT 3 to Chat GPT 3.5, all of a sudden, folks were seeing ghosts in the machine, and folks were thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is real," right? Yeah. So I would say that, like, I don't know, Kristen, if you have anything to add to that, like, what was your experience early on in dealing with these kinds of models, and how, especially like given how much industry experience you've had, like these things have been percolating for a while now.
Yeah. I don't know how I'm supposed to go after you, but okay, I'll try. So for me, yeah, it's come up in a variety of ways, especially like at HP, as a very general, statistician, and I served across, R&D and manufacturing and business analytics, all that good stuff. But yeah, it shows up all over the place, but it also has, brought up issues of just data quality in general, because all a model is a generalization of the data and different assumptions that you build into it. So while there's this, often desire to create these really cool, complex models that handle large, volumes, varieties, and just velocities of data, it's kind of it's being met with, this, oh man, we actually have to look at what's training this model and these algorithms that are, handling these, wide variety of data. Because they're influential. They're being deployed everywhere. I don't know of a single like large global company that doesn't use some level of natural language processing and that kind of thing. So it gets into all kinds of interesting, ethical issues, as you might imagine. But yeah. We've used it throughout the entire tech development process. Like, for instance, in manufacturing, we're at a day and age where we're expected to manufacture things faster and faster, shorten our learning cycles, the number of learning cycles you have. So you have to use technology to quicken, your learning cycles, but you still have to train the models. And, we're also kind of met with these limitations in terms of what can a model do and what can't it do. A model isn't necessarily going to have, years and years of anecdotal experience that can kind of let you know, yeah, this part is defective. This is not normal. All it can really do is do what you have trained it to do. And even if it's reinforcing itself, reinforcement learning, you still have to provide some guidelines. Otherwise, it's not the equivalent of the human mind. So it's very, very interesting. But yeah, I found that particularly as a statistician in those spaces, I felt like I was the one that was kind of pushing back on, like, okay, yes, that is a great model. It's going to be awesome. But let's think about, where did this data come from? Is it reliable? What steps should we do to create more reliable data if that is truly an issue, data integrity and whatnot. So it's an interesting field to be in, because there's all these sources of inertia in terms of, desire to deploy these things, but it has to be done responsibly.
So, Kristen, I'm actually curious about something related to kind of this, like, I don't know, like the missing data, the kind of the stuff that doesn't exist. So, if you think about why these large language models have been so successful, a big part of it is because language is already highly compressed in terms of the form of information. So compare it to, for instance, like all of the photons that are hitting your eyeball every second, right? That's a huge amount of information as well. And our brain somehow kind of compresses and categorizes that as well. But we don't have that documented in the way that language is documented and available and compressed, right? And so there's a decision that is kind of a cultural decision in how information is compressed. So you take language like the word brownie or something, right? So the word brownie is a highly compressed chunk of information, right? You've got associations with vanilla ice cream and sugar and like maybe memories from your childhood, or the fact that your older brother stole your brownie, or right, like there's all of this this information that is compressed into this one term. And the way that it's compressed into that one term is culturally determined, right? So we've got words whose meaning is culturally determined, and then we're using these words, right, to then inform future decisions. And so the compression piece, right, which is all about what to remove, right, from the information, is a big part of this puzzle, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it can completely sway your analysis one way or another. It can have all kinds of repercussions. And it's especially hard because, language is so fluid, so you're trying to compress this thing that's extremely dynamic. I kind of on a dare, I used the phrase "what the sigma" in my Data 152 class just to see what their reaction would be. But I mean, sigma has always been the summation symbol in statistics for the longest time. And now Gen Alpha has just taken this and been like, it's a phrase now. But like if you're trying to, have a model that's looking at sentiment in some way, like how do you classify this moving target, because language, changes over time. And even one word is going to mean something completely different to two different people. So it's a very interesting problem, especially as society as a whole, like progresses and changes their mindset on different things. So
that description is cracked. All right. Tiffany, Ohio. I have a 9-year-old daughter, so I am bombarded with language I have no understanding of on a constant basis. Let's see. So what I hear about a lot in industry is kind of the areas where these large language models in particular are starting to take jobs and not just kind of help people do their work, but actually, replace a lot of the work that, was previously done by humans. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, did you see some of that at HP? Like where are you seeing that process kind of culminating?
Yeah, I saw bits and pieces of it before I ended up coming here, but I'm seeing more and more of it, and also I'm seeing it in the classroom as well. So it's interesting to see that kind of dynamic, because at tech companies like HP, you have people who are experienced in either that programming language or just thinking in that logical way. So even if you use AI, and I mean, ChatGPT is awesome, but it also, in my experience, has created some very ugly code that's very easy to detect when my students try to use it. So, but it doesn't have some of the interpersonal know-how. It has some, actually. You can actually do a mock interview with ChatGPT, which is kind of fun. But yeah, it's companies I've seen have slowly warmed up to it because, companies are very, especially like tech companies, are very protective of their IP. Like they don't want their intellectual property just going out there, and they certainly don't want it training a model that's publicly available like that. So I noticed a lot of apprehension up front. And of course, now that there are, you can have your own, chat GPT and all that stuff. So like there are more guardrails in place for companies that want to use the power of it and leverage the power of it. But yeah, it's still always going to be a little dicey in terms of like how willing are they to, let their guard down to even use something like this. But yeah, no, it's absolutely making people more efficient. And like when I was learning how to code, I learned by example a lot. So if there was something, or I'm like, I know what I want to do, I have forgotten the exact function that's probably going to change if it's in the timers. So I would go to Stack Overflow, or I would just, I would look online for something similar, and then I would make those connections, and then, yeah, I would adapt it to my particular case and make it my own. And that was still a form of learning. So there's that piece of it. But I also would know when something wasn't what I needed because I had experience. I had gone through the learning process of making the mistakes, getting the soul crushing red font that says I did it wrong. It's all learning, and I learned from my mistakes. So where it kind of becomes difficult is like when you're teaching introductory level classes like I am, where I'm trying to establish that intuition so you can know when something is not right or if something is just not going to work. But, trying to make sure that students know, like, no, you got to do your work right now. Like, you got to make the mistakes. This is the time to make mistakes because, AI is everywhere. Generative AI is truly everywhere. And it's when used properly, and to kind of augment the creative thinking and the critical thinking, awesome, amazing. So yeah, when it's used to kind of automate stuff that's not necessarily critical to the strategy of an organization or anything like that, that's awesome. Because you still need critical thinkers in the workplace, in academia, everywhere. So I don't shy away from it in my classes. I do tell them, I'm like, y'all, I'm still teaching you how to code and how to think about this. So I will let you know when it is okay to use ChatGPT. Like if you're writing an introduction like that, I just need some background information on catapults. Well, cool. This class is not on catapults. So you can use that to at least get the creative juices flowing. And then, of course, I still want you to do your own research to augment it. But that's not the main learning objective of the class. If the main learning objective of the class is to learn how to code and learn how to think about it and learn different ways of accomplishing the same thing in a given programming language, that's where I can see it as being kind of harmful or delaying that learning process because you're not making those mistakes. You're not making those connections. So that's kind of what I've experienced in the classroom. And go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I see. I kind of wanted to riff on a portion of what you were saying because I'm starting to see this disconnect that actually worries me a little bit, right? And that is, right, that the skills that are becoming most important in industry are no longer like the entry level skills. Yeah. So like when I first got a job, it's just, I knew how to write, some C++ and some JavaScript and, and I got going and I learned a bunch of other stuff along the way. The entry level jobs, like the qualifications, like everybody wants someone to enter their company with 4 years of experience right out of college. Because they need integrators. They need the people who already kind of know like this fundamental stuff, have some intuition, right? And then can use the tools to kind of put together a solution. And so I'm trying to play this out. Like, what's the end game? And it seems to me that really what we're doing is just, kind of lengthening the gestation period for, professional competency, where you have to somehow get experience without having access to entry-level jobs. There's a paradox that I don't know quite how to solve. I'm convinced that institutions that adhere to kind of, like a liberal education ethos are better positioned to produce students that can do this, because it's inherently sort of an interdisciplinary critical thinking kind of integration style of work these days. But I'm also struck by the kind of unwillingness, of industry to confront this. And what they end up doing is spending all of their money trying to hire the folks with 10 years of experience from their competitor, right? Rather than investing in kind of the mentorship and kind of experience generating programs on their own employees. And I don't know how to square that circle, but it's definitely something that institutions and schools like ours need to be thinking about in our curricular development, I would think.
Absolutely. And I think it's freeing. Like generative AI it's freeing in a sense, because rather than doing the really like tactical kind of stuff where you're like, oh, if I could just start with a template, I could just like be more efficient and solve the critical problems. It's freeing in that sense. And I was super happy about it because like I like to do strategical things. But that's the pivot. It's like a lot of like entry level stuff did tend to be more tactical. And then as you got more familiar with the business, developed that business savvy, all that good stuff, then you pivoted, over time to the strategic. But yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, we're at a point where companies are like, well, I have Copilot for this. I have this, in place. What value are you adding to this? And the value that our students add is their brilliant minds and their ability to answer the right question and to dig deeper and like, hey, let's pursue this because this makes sense. Or maybe we need to gather this. Let's set up a study. Like that's really driving the overall strategy forward is, I think, what our students will provide. And I've thought about this a lot too, because like I'm teaching statistical engineering this semester, and it's the first time I'm teaching it, and I've framed it kind of like an internship turned into a class where, I make them uncomfortable on purpose, not too uncomfortable, but just like I'm like, okay, well, what other questions do you need to ask to answer this question? And okay, what if I give you this constraint? What if there's, you don't have enough budget for that? Now, what do you do? So like, I'm infusing a lot more of those types of questions into the class itself, because that's what they're going to be met with in the workforce. And like students who are able to make that transition and are used to, being hit with, oh, what about this? What about this? And are, already kind of in that nimble mental state, I think they're going to be the ones that are truly successful in this age of AI.
Yeah, I agree. I've been talking to hiring managers a lot lately, right? And what they've been saying is that all of the students who are coming out of, traditional like CS programs, they're waiting for like the coding interview, right? Like, let me show you that I can write, a class in Java and, it has inheritance that does this recursive thing or whatever, right? But 80% of the questions in those interviews are like behavioral questions, situational questions, right? Like integrating questions. And all these students are just deemed unqualified right off the bat because all they're doing is approaching, this situation from the standpoint of like kind of like a pure narrow engineer, engineering mindset. And I just don't think it's going to work like that in the future, or even now. Now is the future.
Yeah.
So the other like kind of societal ramification, I think, and I don't know, I'm kind of open to push back on this, is just a greater divide between the haves and the have-nots. Right? If we are lengthening the gestation period for professional development, then only those folks who have the confidence and the means to invest in themselves for a longer period of time are ultimately going to be the winners, right? And then there's a widening gap between the groups who can afford to invest in themselves and those who can't. So again, I don't know how to solve this problem, but this strikes me as, possibly the biggest kind of ethical issue that is going to show up for advanced societies in the next 10 years or so.
If I may, because I want to get back to the ethical part, but we've had two questions that come in around the application of AI within the classroom space, experiential learning, those things. And so it's really relevant. And then we can get into the larger stuff that keeps everyone up at night. What challenges do you think generative AI poses for academic integrity? You touched on it a little bit. And how might universities like Willamette adapt their policies to account for AI generated content?
Let me give a somewhat flippant answer, and then I'll let Kristen kind of give the real answer. So I encourage, all of our students to cut and paste, to copy, right, to steal, with attribution, don't worry, but to take and remake, right?
Yeah.
And, this is not a new thing. I haven't written an original piece of code in 30 years. It's always some combination of work that other people have done before me. And where my contribution comes is in, the unique reconfiguration and recombination of the work that folks have done before me. And so when we're talking about these sorts of technologies as kind of aids to thinking and work, they've always existed. They're kind of turbocharged now. But, I'm not on principle, right, all that worried about that aspect of the tech.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Yeah. I think it gets back to it's like, what is the intent of that particular class? And I mean, because like Jameson said, like I've learned both from, teachers and then also from, just looking online and being like, okay, what have other people done? Oh, that's an interesting way to go about it. Cool. But at the end of the day, I looked at multiple sources. I cross-checked, so there's still an aspect of critical thinking that's involved in that whole process. And where I've seen some students kind of go, off trail a little bit is when they trust everything. they try to circumvent the learning process, and they trust everything that ChatGPT has given them. And it can hallucinate. I've seen it on a few occasions. It's kind of funny in some cases. But like I said, it's not, if they're not, at least double checking it, looking up other sources, that kind of thing, then they're not learning. And that's what I worry about. But also, I know that prohibition doesn't work. So acting like it doesn't exist and saying, don't do it, is also not effective. So I try to walk a fine line between saying, okay, I will let you know when it's okay to use it. And I'll show you how to use it well. So for instance, if they've taken a few coding classes, they have an intuition behind, this is going to give me an error message if I do this, that kind of thing. then I'm like, yeah, use it to give you a template. So for instance, like I'm doing a project with our football and soccer teams at the same time, which is so fun. And we're collecting our own data, and we're producing a website for our own team. They will only be available to our team. Sorry if anyone is from another university and wants to beat us in football. But that's the thing where I'm like, yeah, it absolutely makes sense to use ChatGPT to give us a template for the website layout. We still have to code up the stuff behind the scenes. We still have to write all the functions that produce the graphs automatically, build in all the reactivity and stuff, but it's working smarter, not harder. I'm like, that is not the main objective of this project that I'm doing with them. It's getting them to realize how the front end connects with the back end, and how to make sure they talk with each other, that whole thing. So I think that's actually been a really good example of how, once you get to a certain point, absolutely use it. But you have to be really careful for those intro classes, in my opinion.
So Kristen, I mean, we have such high standards for AI, right? Like I hallucinate probably 10% of the time. But we tend to hold our machines to a much higher standard, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I can forgive people, machines. No. Yeah.
If I may, because you kind of already touched on it, but when thinking about AI tools and the application in the classroom, someone asked, like, are there specific ways or where they enhance student learning in subjects like statistics or data science? You kind of touched on it, but if there's anything else that you want to add before maybe we get back to the wider ethics discussion.
Yeah. I think it's great especially if you're brand new, because I have a lot of students who are brand new to statistics, upper level math, and they're math phobic in many cases. So giving them to kind of let their guard down a little bit and be receptive to it can be challenging. So there are times in which I say, go to ChatGPT and ask it to explain it to you simply. Like if what I said in class doesn't make sense, you can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, explain analysis of variance to me like I'm 10 or something like that. And it actually does a really good job for stuff that's, it's been around for a long time. There's not a really high risk of it hallucinating because there's not a whole lot to train on. Like for stuff that's, like it's well known, it's great. It's great. Simplify this text for me and just help me digest it. That's fantastic. And if that is making it more accessible for plenty of people, that's great.
And are you seeing kind of a trend at all amongst students where maybe incoming freshmen or folks who are using ChatGPT now and it's been part of their kind of common understanding or on their phones, are you seeing them being a little bit more aware of and willing to engage with this versus maybe students a few years ago or a decade ago? Or is everyone still like catching up quickly and doing their best?
Oh, they come in knowing all the things in my experience. I'm like, you can do that? What? So yeah, I'm learning extra capabilities of it. But yeah, for students who are coming in experienced and they, already know how to code in that language, usually they don't rely on it for those kinds of things. They rely on it for the aspects of writing that they don't enjoy. But as far as the technical piece, they're fine, which, not great for, honing your technical writing chops. So yeah, if you write something and you just want to take that extra step, maybe, but again, it's still circumventing some level of the learning process. Now, where I've seen it go truly badly is when they come in and they use it as a crutch because, homework's due in 30 minutes. I procrastinated and, here we are. Like I said, it's pretty easy to catch it in my experience, just because it's trained on the internet. And a lot of the newer stuff that we're teaching, because like we stay up to date in terms of our programming languages and stuff. They'll produce code that I think is kind of ancient looking. And it's more similar to what I used to write in base R because that's all that existed. And if it's a student that learned it, in base R, then fine. But usually whenever I catch it in the homework, I'll have them come in and I'll just ask them, I'm like, do you know what this line is doing here? And if they're not able to answer that, then I have pretty much confirmation that, yeah, you chat GPT'd your way through this homework. And I tell them why I don't want them using it. I'm like, I'm not saying forever. I'm saying for this purpose, please be willing to make mistakes, because no one wants to. People tend to be risk averse. No one wants to be told that you're wrong. But I mean, that's part of programming, is constantly being told that you're wrong, having your feelings hurt, and then getting over it. And that's it.
And so is adulting when they leave the university and go out into the real world.
Yeah.
It'll be a big part of that as well. We also have someone that's kind of interested in the newer models coming out, and are they producing better results with thereby reducing hallucinations? And if so, do you think there's kind of a limit to what they're capable of doing or able to do, or has that not been reached?
So I can address this at least kind of in broad terms. We are reaching some limits, and the limits are kind of fun. It's like we've used all the stuff, right? Like we trained on the whole internet, right? And we've got, a billion, 10 billion columns of features, right, that we're using as, potential factors in our models. The other limitation, which is probably more of a temporary limitation, is the cost and energy required to train the largest models. It costs lots and lots of dollars to do this. And so the industry, at least right now, is very focused on potent workarounds to that basic problem. And the most common version of that is what's called a retrieval augmented generation. And these models take existing large language models that are, trained for lots and lots of money once, and then augments the response of that model by adding a whole bunch of data to the question it asks. And it basically says, okay, use what you already know, plus all this new stuff that I'm dumping on you, right, to answer this question, as opposed to just what you know, right? And so that technique allows a couple of things. On the one hand, it does kind of reduce the error rate. But I think the more important thing that it does is that it hypercontextualizes the responses. And so when you heard Kristen talking about, kind of industry or organization specific models, often what's happening is that you'll have one of these very large open source models that, like, for instance, Meta has open sourced a model, augmented with company data as part of the retrieval process, so that the response is up to date, right? If you're asking your local chatbot, what were last quarter's financial results, you actually want last quarter's financial results. And so you have to augment, right, the stuff that the model is using to answer the question. The other limitation I touched on earlier, and that is basically a reasoning limitation. So we've got limitations inherent in kind of the cultural choices that I call them choices, but really it's just this fairly organic process of determining, what meanings are or are not attached to words, right? And so we've got, a limitation in the way that the data is compressed. And in the case of language and historical language, right, we're just looking at, what's been written in the past. Then we've got, a cultural influence that limits the types of things that we will be able to ask the model to answer. And moving forward, you're going to see, I think, a lot of energy around different compression mechanisms, and not just with language, but with other types of information. And so you can think about like learning physics, right? So like how to move about the world, or kind of gain or reason about interactions between massive objects of some form or another. And there's a lot of data that we absorb as humans. By some estimates, we've absorbed more data through our eyes in the first 3 months of life than all of the data that the most current LLM has ever been trained on, right? And so there's a set of information out in the world that helps us understand and interact with each other and with the world that we live in, that doesn't have kind of a good compression algorithm. And so folks are trying to figure out, what's the best way to get, the platonic ideal of treeness from all of the versions of trees that we see out in the world, for instance.
Yeah, and I also wonder, because, like the whole internet is training these models, if it's not adding to inequity for the people who are not represented, or, the aspects of life that are not already on the internet, and just general availability of the internet and whatnot, like, especially as we're creating decision-making models, like we're creating these algorithms based on what's already out there. If there's already inequity there and underrepresentation, are we at risk of perpetuating that? Probably.
Yeah, no, I think we are. Like I don't even think it's at risk. I think it's like, but I think it's actually just like supercharging kind of what's already like systems of access and privilege like already reproduce themselves, and this is like supercharging that ability in a way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like from an ethics perspective, like if it's using all of the information that's out there, it's within the social construct and historical context of what that was all developed within, and then it distills it down and maintains some of those structural deficits or differences. So there's a couple of questions really around like, we know that there's some ethical issues within AI, how people are using it. Of course, in the news, we've heard all about like artists having their intellectual property and things used in training models to then produce artwork that with no attribution or connection to their original efforts, and some other things. So one of the questions is, do you think it's possible to validate the integrity or ethical collection of training data, especially as a user of an AI tool? And then moreover, do you think it is even possible in the first place to collect the necessary volume of data in some kind of ethically sourced manner?
I can try to answer a little bit of the first one, and maybe, I'm interested to hear what Kristen has to say on both of these. Let's see. So anytime you talk about validating something on ethical grounds, right, you're necessarily taking on some sort of moral frame. And so you have to define, what your frame of reference is for making that kind of, moral claim to begin with. There are some pretty obvious examples, right, that we can point at, like, a model that I'm early in the days, right? This is kind of a canonical example. Early on in the days of machine learning, there were models that folks were trying to implement to predict who would be a good leader at a company. Mm-hmm. And these models kept predicting that men would be good leaders at companies. And they dug into it and they found out, well, clearly the model is going to predict that because it's being trained on historical data, right? Where there's a lot of men in leadership positions, right? And so it's going to kind of perpetuate that inequity. Those sorts of problems can be solved actually with sampling methodologies in the training data. But you have to be awfully clear about the very specific kind of thing that you want to fix in those cases. But as soon as we start getting into kind of bigger, broader, like, I don't know, like more, kind of less defined, right, ethical issues, it gets much, much harder to make any sort of claim about like validating, the integrity of a given output.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's really like three questions in one. So it's on the data collection piece. There's been a lot of work on what is consent. Like if you walk into a store and there's a little thing saying, smile, you're on camera, at least you're being told that if you proceed further into this store, we're collecting your image, facial recognition, we're collecting your image. So in a sense, it's almost being implied by you, assuming it's clearly visible and all that. But there are a lot of cases in which our data, so our likeness, all these things are being collected unbeknownst to us. And so, so I guess assuming that people give consent to their data being collected, that's one piece of it. But it also matters who's doing the analysis and who's putting these algorithms together, because you can have all the data in the world. You can try to weight it a certain way. You can do all the things. But if the people analyzing it don't have cultural context for how the data was collected and other stuff and the potential ramifications of their decision and what's being decided by this algorithm, then you could really cause a lot of harm. And it's something I thought about a lot working at HP, because, when I was there, there were all these studies that showed there's major underrepresentation in the tech space with various marginalized groups. But I looked around me, I'm like, well, a lot of the people who are in the marginalized groups, who in theory, whose communities might be impacted by some of these decisions, they're not on the teams that are creating these algorithms. So the underrepresentation on these tech teams, that are often like, oh my gosh, they're the data rock stars. And I'm like, awesome, thank you. But also it's like, if you don't have representation, you could have people who, it's not on purpose, may not know about, but yeah, they may be missing major pieces of context. And if you have a model that's created out of context, it is dangerous. It just is. So that's another piece of the ethical piece. So like when you have people on these teams that are, degrees of separation away from the original data, some of which may not be big data, mind you, because that's another piece of all this. It's not always big data. You could, like I said, you can cause a lot of harm. And I think the author of, there's two authors of Data Feminism, which is a really good book. I have it on audio. I don't have a physical copy, but they go into that very thing, which is like, are you in danger of perpetuating inequality just from sheer lack of knowledge about how the data was collected and who's going to be affected by it?
If I may, because that leads right into a question. Of course, people are also outside of some of us graduated over 20 years ago, forgive us, but we're trying to stay current and on top of it, along with learning new words and whatever Ohio means. But within that, as folks who are on the cusp of this research and educating future leaders in these areas, like what resources do you recommend for people to educate themselves on AI and its advancements and applications?
So are you talking about like just to learn some of the methods, or just learn about like the implications of AI and like data privacy, that whole thing?
I think it's both. I think it's, what should, as like informed consumers almost, when we're thinking of media or, anything that produces information that maybe isn't fully vetted, or that you need to have some critical thinking and a vetting process for. How do you tell if it's AI or human generated, and verify that? And then for folks who maybe want to take this as a topic that they delve into more, what might be a learning resource or something in that way. So it's like critical consumer or engager, and then a learner.
Yeah. You want me to go first?
Yeah, you can go first. I got to collect my thoughts on this one.
Yeah. All right. So the very first book that I started off with, like in terms of like data ethics, because I think it's nice to have that inform your learning later on, like the technical stuff. Boom. Weapons of Math Destruction, Kathy O'Neill. We had matching hair at one point, but I keep changing my hair. But she is really phenomenal, and worked in industry as well as in academia. She was at, I think, Barnard. But yeah, she just talks about how algorithms throughout time have been, used both for good, but can also have this like endless loop of inequality and inequity because of how powerful they are. And then one of my new faves, Unmasking AI. I get no proceeds from this, just so you know. But yeah, by Joy Bolamwini. I love this one in particular because, first of all, she's like super nerdy and goofy, and I love her. I want her to be my best friend. But she talks about her journey when she was a grad student at MIT, and how, she's a computer scientist, and she was trying to train a model, like one of these like off the shelf models, and it wouldn't recognize her face. And she found out it's because, I think she's Ghanaian Canadian. But yeah, she's darker complected, and it was trained on, fair skinned people. And, when you think about how often facial recognition systems are being deployed, and there has been pushback on that, which is good. I think Portland actually recently said they weren't going to do that, which is great. But yeah, I think it's delivered in a very narrative kind of fashion. And it's like, here's my experience with it, and here's how I fought back against like people taking data without permission and that kind of thing. So I think it's a cool resource to have. And then, data feminism is amazing. Yeah.
So the internet can have all my data. I don't know. I feel like I'm not sure how Instagram is going to give me such good product recommendations if I don't just let them have everything. And so take it. They know me. Like, I don't know how they know me, but they know me.
Probably gonna mess up your model.
But talking about like learning, I don't think most of the kind of mainstream media outlets are writing about this very well yet, and so I think you have to kind of look a little bit deeper to try to figure some of this stuff out. Harvard recently launched the Harvard Data Science Review, which I think is worth a regular read. I also listened to a whole bunch of kind of nerdy deep dive podcasts that are worth it. I think it was Lex Friedman's podcast. He recently interviewed Jan LeCun, who is kind of the chief AI scientist for Meta. He's based out of France, and they're doing a bunch of really cool stuff. actually based out of France. There's a bunch of AI researchers that are doing some cutting edge stuff there. So if you're interested in like the frontier, I would kind of look for the top AI researchers on your favorite podcast and try to listen and learn a little bit there. That's certainly what I do. But it's such a kind of complicated, multifaceted topic that I'm not sure even the science journalists are tackling it at the depth that the moment requires.
Yeah, and just to kind of like finish off, like I think we don't have to know the intricate details of all the algorithms to know kind of what it is. I think general understanding of the fact that a model is a generalization of the data and the assumptions, and getting people thinking about, okay, where'd the data come from? Was it sourced ethically? Just that kind of thing, and just knowing that that's what it's doing. I think that is like step one, and it's a very powerful step that I hope the general public does. So, yeah,
I agree. Like one takeaway, like, ask what's missing, right? If you're collecting data, you're making a choice about what not to collect.
That's perfect. I know we're just about at time, so I wanted to leave it to you both to be able to have some final thoughts. But Jameson, I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, tell us where. I believe that you might be in our newest academic building.
Oh yeah, I'm at the GPC, Tiffany.
Can you just for in a minute, can you just say, because we did have someone ask, like, where is this? That doesn't look like Willamette. Well, it's Willamette now, but
yeah. So if you're familiar with the Pearl District in downtown Portland, we are kind of right on the edge of the Pearl by Lovejoy Bakery, which is dangerous. They have amazing breakfast burritos, scones, muffins, etc. We're in a building called the Natural Capital Center, which is also kind of informally known as the EcoTrust building. And it's about a block and a half from our art and design school, PNCA. And so, we're starting to kind of grow the family here up in Portland. And it's a beautiful space. I mean, just over a year ago, I was still, touring downtown spaces and negotiating leases. And it was very much like, kind of a skunkworks project. And so, the fact that it all came together and we're now hosting classes there in kind of a beautiful space. I encourage everyone to come down, say hi, enjoy it. It's a great accomplishment, and I think our students are really going to benefit from proximity to PNCA, location in downtown, and all of the kind of updated facilities that we have for them.
That's wonderful. And I just want to let those who are online with us know that we're planning to do an alumni preview night, or kind of open house, as it were. So we'll share that information when we can. But in our final couple of minutes, because we started a little late, are there any final thoughts that either of you would like to share before I sign us off for the evening? We bounced all over, so.
I want to circle back to this idea of kind of widening inequity in society, because I think that, to me, it's it's a big kind of meta problem, right? So some of the ethical stuff that we've touched on is very specific to the models themselves, and how they can perpetuate, various inequities in society. This idea of kind of a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots is kind of a level up sort of result of this technology coming about. And I just want to encourage, all of our listeners to keep thinking about this, because I know many of our alums are employers, right? And probably facing all of the, cost cutting and pressures that everyone else is facing right now, and trying to make decisions about which technologies to bring on board, what do I invest in, et cetera. I think making those decisions, with this frame of reference is going to be really important, because I just fear that we're going to leave a huge chunk of society behind if we aren't conscious and purposeful in keeping everyone trained, current, and valued within an organization. And so I don't have any great solutions to this problem, right? Other than to kind of keep talking about it whenever I get the chance, so that folks, are aware and continue to make decisions with that awareness in their own lives.
Yeah, I'll just add like 15 seconds because that was really good. And so having equity in mind when crafting these algorithms is huge, but also inviting other voices to the table is going to be critical too, because you can try to do as much background work as you can, but it's not going to be the same as someone who has a certain lived experience and can offer further context for how this model can and should be deployed. So I think I'll end on that.
And just the diversity of lived reality and experience, and that's an important value within a meaningful society as well. So with that, I will thank you both for spending your evening with me. And I understood most of the words that you said. So thank you so much for keeping what can be a highly complex topic a little bit easier to understand for those of us who maybe aren't in this realm all the time. It was wonderful talking about artificial intelligence applications in the classroom and in industry. A lot of the ethical things that we aren't quite sure how to navigate and wrestle with just yet. We hope those of you who are online with us also enjoyed this discussion. This will be captioned and put up online, and we will also send you some more information after this with some of those book recommendations, maybe a podcast or two, and the information of our speakers should you want to continue this conversation. With that, we hope you all are staying safe and healthy, enjoying this fall season, and we hope to see you online sometime soon. Take care and have a good night, everyone.